Okay.
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
I'm on mute, that's why. Can you hear me now? Atish? Should I send Sylvia a ping?
Petronella, hey.
Atish, hi. We've had to do a bit of miracle working, but
Oh yeah? How so?
we're here live.
Got
the internet. Yeah, it's been a bit of a race. But anyway, we're here.
Got there with 2 minutes to spare.
I know. So what I'll do is that I'll introduce you.
Sure.
Yeah, and a bit about life itself and the Sunday salons, and then yeah, and then you can kick off, and then I'll start sharing the screen with the slides.
Okay, great. How many people are you expecting?
I think there's about 12 people, maybe 14 coming.
Okay. Hi, David.
Hi, how are you?
I like your setup there. Where are you?
I'm in a camper van on my parents' driveway. It's where I'm doing my latest quarantine.
Ah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Nice, cool. How long have you been holed up in there?
Well, I've just got back from a little holiday, so and in a week's time I'm heading out to Africa. So I'm just gonna spend this week lying low in the caravan and try not to get too close to my parents, basically.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Petronella, did you figure out the slides?
Yes.
And that's all done.
So, can you guys hear the background music, just to check? Can you hear background noise? I'm afraid rural France internet is really difficult. We've had they've cancelled installing it twice, so it's been a bit difficult. Anyway, I'll put myself, after I finish speaking, Atish, I'll mute myself so that people can see.
Hi, Alyssa.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm guessing all those bottles are not from last night.
I'm not. This is not my place actually, but so they're not my bottles.
Hi everyone, we're just going to give a few minutes for people to start logging on, and then maybe a few people there's one person who's saying that she's going to be a bit late, but we'll start without her anyway. But yeah, I'll give it another 2 minutes. Okay.
Cool.
Is Rufus or Sylvie joining us?
We're here.
Ah, hello.
Hello.
How are you, Sylvie?
Yeah, video will be off because we don't have very good internet here.
No worries. How's the baby?
Baby's very well.
Oh, that's great.
You look very handsome with your beard and your long hair.
Yeah, it's amazing what image editing can do.
Are you in the UK?
I am, yeah. I'm currently in Croydon, so South London.
Cool.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Are we recording this, Petro? Yes, we are. Yay! And Liam's here and Elisa's here. Oh my God, that's great.
Yeah, hi Sylvie.
Hey.
Okay, I'll mute myself.
Hi, Josh.
Oh yeah, Atish.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Nice to see the people here.
Got my biggest fan. I've got my dad there as well.
Oh, is he?
Hi, Dad.
Yay! This is great. Hello, Atish Dad.
He hasn't figured out the muting. Oh, and my mom. Hi, Mom. So sweet.
Oh, we got the producers of Atish.
Yeah.
Marvelous, wonderful. They did a great job at educating you. So I guess that's amazing.
It's nice for them to be here. So where are you guys, Sylvia? Are you in La Cheraye?
No, we moved from La Cheraye. We're in the new Bergerac hub right next to Plum Village.
Ah, beautiful. That must be so
Yeah.
soulful.
Yes, and Rufus is on Atian duty at the moment, so he'll join back in a moment.
Sure. Whereabouts are you based, Josh?
I am generally nomadic. I've been spending my time in Italy over COVID at a place called Liminal Village. And now I'm back in Ireland. So you can see the view of my family home.
Oh, that is gorgeous.
It's a fine spot. Dog likes it anyway.
Yeah, you might
How
feed
about
on.
you guys? Yeah, I gather you all know. I gather everybody kind of knows each other already from the vibes.
David is shaking his head a little bit.
I know Petra.
David's an old friend and he's a teacher, so it's relevant.
Oh, excellent.
Fine.
You can introduce yourself, Dave.
What do you teach, David?
Physics, but I stumbled on a slightly different job. I applied for a physics teacher job in the DRC, and over the course of the interviews, managed to negotiate myself the head of secondary. So it's quite bizarre, but I feel like I'm stepping into a sort of it's a totally brand new school that's just been built, and they're looking to me quite a lot to set up the secondary school. So it feels like I'm stepping into a bit of a petri dish, and I'll have a lot of freedom to explore different things. You know what I mean? Try and set something up that feels a bit different.
Where is the school?
Congo.
Okay, lovely.
Lovely. That's not the usual reaction.
I can't say I've been, so I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna start so that we sort of start on time, and other people may join as we go through. So thank you all for joining us on a Sunday afternoon for our Sunday salon today with Atish Mistry, who I'm pointing that way because that's where he is on my screen. He is an old friend of Life Itself and been active at coming to our gatherings, and recently has done an about turn in his career from working in finance to now being about to start as a maths teacher come this academic year. And yeah, he's very kind of keen to sort of share with us the past year he's taken out the past year to research and discover what's going on with our current education system. And whether it's fit for purpose for what our future requires. So it's very much in tune with what Life Itself is about and in our inquiry about wise education. So just to give, for those of you who are new to Life Itself, we are a community seeking a wiser world. We have hubs, sort of co-living hubs where people live together to practice and apply some of our thinking in how to create a wiser world. So that's through kind of looking at our cultural blind spots. So Liam, who's here, is director of our research institute, and looking at how do we create more kind of collective practices to live into a wiser culture. And we also, as well as having these kind of co-living hubs, we also run online programs. So we have these once a month, these Sunday salons, and we also have kind of other calls, essentially about kind of enabling people with their personal development and transformation. And yeah, so without any further ado, I would love to introduce you to Atish for him to kind of start his presentation. He'll present, and then we'll have a kind of open discussion with everybody here to sort of share your views and thoughts on what was said and to provide anything to add and to contribute. And then at the end, I'll just do a little bit about Sunday salons and whether if any of you would be interested in sort of stepping up to do a presentation as well. Okay, Atish, over to you, and I will share my screen with your slides.
Excellent, and it's nice to have you all here on a Sunday afternoon. So, like Petra said, my relationship with edTech and now Life Itself started maybe 2-3 years ago at the first retreat in Lasharai, and I was fortunate enough to live in the London hub when it was. So it's nice to reconnect with the community. A little bit about myself, if we can move on, Petronella. So I worked in investment banking for the past 10 years. Now that might conjure up all sorts of images, and the stereotypes probably hold true there. But the things I was doing, I was a client salesperson. So I had responsibility for looking after pension schemes and asset managers in the UK. And I would structure relatively complex derivative-based transactions. So what that means is we would engineer some financial instruments on a bespoke basis for the needs of a pension scheme that might be looking to hedge out their liabilities or something like that. And I loved it. For many, many years, I loved that job. There were some real kind of perks to doing that. And I met some super interesting people, and the work was really at the far end of the spectrum in terms of the complexity I was kind of seeking as somebody with a bit of a mathy brain. So I loved that. But last September, I decided to pursue my real passion, which is working with young people. And so I quit my job and threw caution to the wind have taken a year out. And that year, as you can imagine, has had some high moments and some low moments. But a couple of the most joyous things over that year have been teaching in different schools in the UK and in India. So one of the things I'm proud of was spending time at a school in India and teaching there, which was for a couple of days. I actually ended up on the advisory board of this school in India, which they're fascinating because they are upskilling kids from a slum area into the digital age. So from a very young age, from about 5 years old, they're taking coding classes. And the school ends at 16, at which point they enter the Mother Miracle Academy, which is effectively an employer that then outsources and is an agency for anybody that's looking for tech developers in India. So it's an incredible school. It's a relatively new concept there, but something that I enjoyed being part of. And the contrast to that is I worked at Quest Academy here in Croydon, and that's probably one of the worst schools in Croydon, which, if you know anything about Croydon, quite a lot. It's quite a rough school. And that was a completely different experience. It was with secondary school children, aged between 11 and 18. And I was a teaching assistant. So I was helping the teachers prepare their lessons, mark their work, and as David will know, just the little stuff like interventions and helping kids in the classroom where they're struggling. And that experience just reaffirmed for me the idea that I want to be in this sector. So a couple of other things that I've done in the education space over the last year. That photo that you see there, that was me being an ambassador for a children's charity called Future Frontiers. And the boy there, Akim, is 13 years old. And I was mentoring him and another young lad. And we were exploring all their career options. And I remember at one point, Akim said to me, Atish, you know, the stuff I learned in school is just pointless, especially math. And that really stuck with me because I kind of enjoyed math when I was at school. So I asked him what he wanted to be when he was older. And Akim said, I want to become a crypto trader and a YouTuber, like a lot of young people these days. So I said, okay, well, if you look at me in my job, I use math every day. And he was mildly interested in what I was saying. So then I started explaining to him how the YouTube algorithm uses some relatively simple math to determine who's going to be on the homepage and who's trending. Suddenly he was a bit more interested. And then I got a piece of paper and a pen and started drawing some diagrams of my simplified understanding of the Bitcoin white paper. And for the first time, I had his attention. And I had his attention because I was reverse engineering the stuff that he finds interesting in the real world and then mapping it back to the curriculum. And that was actually the evening that I decided to apply to become a teacher. There was just something that shifted in him, that shifted in me, and that really, I think about a week later, I quit my job after that thing happened. The other couple of things, so I'm currently doing my PGCE, which is the kind of gold standard to become a teacher in the UK, and that will complete in June of next year. So I'll have my qualified teacher status. And I also run a tutoring company called Mindset and Maths, which I've been fairly busy during COVID. The thing I'm trying to do, which is a little bit unique there, is really work on people's belief systems. So in the UK, for a subject like math, people have all this cultural baggage towards the subject. And it comes from many things. It comes from the fact that media often portray mathematicians as these geniuses. And then there's people on the other end of the spectrum that are just not very good at math and not much in between. The reality is most people sit somewhere in between, and there's plenty of research to back up the idea that there's no such thing as a natural mathematician. And so what I've been doing with that tutoring agency is working on the belief systems that people hold with regards to math. and how that's really limiting them. So I'll give you an example there. When I start a tutoring session with some of the kids that I'm tutoring, for the first 5 or 6 minutes, we'll be really diving into their feelings about maths, and I'll be asking them to write their own affirmations. Things like, I can get better at maths, or maths is useful in my everyday life. Math can make me better at my business. Math can make me healthier. Math can keep me on top of my finances, or whatever it might be. And it's early days, but I'm having a lot of engagement with parents and with students doing that. And then the final piece after today is over, I also write something called the Ed Letter. And that's just me documenting my journey and all the things that I learned from the world of education and learning. It's an irregular newsletter whenever I get a chance to write about some aspect of education. So the last couple of things I've written are when GCSEs get scrapped for good, not if. I'll be writing about 2 or 3 homeschooling success stories, people that have taken their kids out of the traditional schooling system, and people that I've interviewed for that. And I'll also be talking about the different types of coding camps that you can send your kids to this summer. So all of that is chronicled on the Ed Letter. So yeah, that's a long way to talk about me and kind of what I've been up to over the past year, but hopefully it gives you a flavor of where I'm coming from and the fact that I'm getting into the education sector because I really love working with children. And I'm still a child at heart myself, and I had 1 or 2 teachers that really batted for me when I was at school. And I went to a not so good state school in Bradford, so from working class background and not so great school. And if it wasn't for those teachers and my great parents, I would not have got to the university that I did. And if I didn't do that, then I would not have landed my job in an investment bank 10 years ago. So in a sense, I have a deep gratitude and indebtitude to those teachers and to the teaching profession. And I want to bring my energy and maybe some of my experience to the job as well. If we can go next. Great. So what I'd like to do is maybe ask you just to think in your mind, and I'll pause for maybe 20, 30 seconds and just conjure up some ideas and images of what school looks like and means to you. Great, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Now, that might evoke all sorts of feelings and images. It certainly does for me when I think about my own schooling experience. And generally, when you speak to people about schooling, there's this idea that education is stuck in the Victorian era, or schools are stuck in the Victorian era. And I don't think that's necessarily true. A lot of people feel qualified to talk about the education sector, and I'm by no means an expert. But a lot of people feel qualified to talk about the education sector because they went to school themselves. And that might have been 15, 20, or even 30 years ago. And a lot has changed in that time. In the schools that I've spent time in, I've seen many things which took me by surprise. So you've got the introduction of the computer science GCSE, you've got things like the Raspberry Pi and people experimenting with coding from primary school. You've got art on the walls and these big kind of murals that people have invested money in, and to put all these inspirational quotes around school. You'd probably find, if you looked for it, some VR headsets at some of these schools. I mean, maybe the analogy is with computers in the 90s and there's only 1 or 2 of them dotted around the entire school. But they are there, and I've definitely had a chance to play with a couple of those. And then there's been a wave of stuff coming in from the likes of Professor Carol Dweck, who's written this book you might have heard of, Mindset, something I've read about 4 or 5 times. But this whole idea that if you have a growth mindset in school, you can accelerate your learning, and there's no such thing as having a fixed ability. And so schools have gone a bit growth set mad over the past couple of years and have really implemented this idea that kids should work on their belief systems and set their own targets and own goals, and be very mindful of the language they use when they say something like, I'm not good at English. They should say something like, I'm not good at English yet. And that message is being reinforced across schools in the UK, at least from what I see. So I don't think it's entirely fair to say schools are stuck in the Victorian era, but it's something that you hear a lot of people say. However, that's not to mask the fact that there are some real issues in education, at least in the UK. One of which, and one of the big ones, is teacher recruitment and retention. So there's estimates that the UK needs something like 10 to 15,000 more teachers than they currently have, which is a huge number if you think about the fact that each class has potentially 30 kids in those classes. So there's a huge shortage of teachers coming into the profession. It's getting better. The Department for Education are providing scholarships for people like me to do their teacher training, but those numbers are nowhere near the mass that they need to really satisfy the demand that's there for schooling. And in parallel, you've got teacher retention. So something in the magnitude of 3 to 5% of experienced teachers, people that have been in the profession for more than 10 years, are leaving every year. And more worryingly, in the first 3 years of becoming a teacher, the turnover is around 25 to 30% of new teachers leave the profession. And you see them, they go off and become accountants, or they go work for a consulting firm or something, and they just can't hack it. They don't feel like they get the support. They don't feel like it's the job that they signed up for. They come with all these poetic ideas about what teaching is supposed to look like, and then the reality hits them and they decide to leave the industry. So that is one of the big issues there. Something that I'm quite passionate about is the fact that standardized assessment, like GCSEs, is run as a business. Now, if you look at the likes of Pearson, which is the FTSE 100 listed company, and a big publisher as well, at one time the biggest publisher in the world, they own an exam board, edXL. And edXL are one of the most prolific exam boards in the UK. If you were to see your GCSE maths or A-level maths, it might be an edXL examination board behind that. And each time a school enters a pupil for one of those exams, edXL are paid, let's say for GCSE maths, they're paid about £47. And if it's for science, they're paid about £80. Then that ratchets up to about 150 if it's for a full A-level. So these companies, edXL, which is ultimately owned by Pearson, are run as a business and for profit. And although they're regulated by Ofqual, by the Office of Qualifications, they have a deep interest and lots of money power to maintain this status quo of standardized testing. I could use the same argument with OCR, which is Oxford, Cambridge, and RSA, which are Cambridge and Oxford University Press, and they own the examination boards for Cambridge Assessment, etc., OCR. And the same thing, they are paid to provide the textbooks that the kids and students are married to for a couple of years, and then they make the bulk of their money when the kids sit these exams, and they make money from doing so, which is something quite frustrating. And you can Google it, and there's plenty of people that I've talked about, is that the best way to set it up? And there's some exam boards which are set up as charities. I need to get that door, is that okay? 1 second.
Never had that happen before on a Sunday. So.
What did you do to your phone?
The realities of Zoom conferences. It's a parcel from Amazon. But I was saying about this idea that assessment is a business, and the more that I look under the hood for that, it's not the case with every big examiner, but there's definitely a sense that assessment is being run as a business. And then one of the other big issues is this widening educational inequality gap. And so educational inequality is typically referenced as the attainment gap in number of months and years between people of a similar age. So people sitting, let's say, their GCSE exam at 16. Now, the facts that I've seen there are that a person from a low income family is on average around 18 months behind a peer from a middle to upper class family in terms of educational attainment at 16 years old. So that in percentage terms, that is a big gap between kids who are taking their GCSEs at the age of 16, and income is one of the key kind of variables, which is a significant variable in that equality gap or inequality gap. Some other things that come to mind, there's been a bit of a bungled edtech response by different schools in the UK. So my sense is, from speaking to people in the edtech sector, there's been a bit of a gold rush towards schools and creating software and product for schools, because naturally with schools traditionally being run based on books and lots of paper, there's a lot of demand to digitize as much of that as possible. The issue is when different schools have different policies and different software, it can all be a little bit incoherent. So for example, some schools are using Microsoft Teams, some are using Google Classroom, some are using Zoom, some are using different parental engagement apps, some are using different marking assessment apps, and it's just all a bit of a mess, to be honest. And it's been brought about because you have different school leaders and different vendors all trying to make a little bit of money. And then one of the big things is both universities and employers are complaining that the graduates that they get through the school cycle are not deep in the key skills that they need to survive and thrive in either a university context or in the place of work. And so some of the things they complain about quite often are the kids come and they can't write a good email. They are not good at public speaking. They have some primitive computing skills if I put them in front of an Excel sheet. They don't have much emotional resilience if somebody says something they don't like at work, and their problem solving skills are way below par. You give them something which is not in the script and they can't figure it out themselves. So these are universal complaints that are coming from employers, and they're coming from universities, and they're being fed to the Department for Education as things to really improve on. Which, if we go now to the next slide, Petro. There's many ways to think about which of these skills we should be teaching children for the 21st century. So one of the frameworks I like to think about with regards to the skills we should be teaching children for the 21st century are the 6 C's. I won't read them out, but you can see what they are there. And the idea here is that we want to move away from the 3 R's of reading, writing, and the purposeful misspelling of arithmetic towards these 6 C's, which are not getting enough focus in school, especially things like creativity, communication, and character building as well. And I quite like that framework for thinking about some of the skills we should be teaching and emphasizing in school. So if we go to the next slide, Petra. As I also read the World Economic Forum report on the skills that schools should be focusing on for the 21st century, this is what they call their Education 4.0 framework. And in addition to those 6 C's, they add a couple of other things that they would like to see in the school of the future. So now, the World Economic Forum is obviously a place where global minds meet, and then that is reflected in policy across the world. So I think it's super interesting that they are honed in on this Education 4.0 framework, and they add a couple of other things here. So personalized and self-paced learning it should be a key ingredient of education going forward, to make it as accessible and inclusive as possible, and to really foster in school the idea of lifelong learning, because there's still this undercurrent and this notion that I just want to get school done with. I want to stop learning and start living. And that's quite a toxic mindset that has infiltrated the education system, this idea that I just want to get my certificate and pass and carry on with my life. And so they rightly identify this idea that schools should be a place that foster intellectual curiosity and this idea that we want to spend a lifelong learning, and this is just one period of time to do that. Interestingly, I also read, I don't know if any of you guys have read this book, but The 100-Year Life by Linda Grattan. It's a fascinating book, and she also talks about this idea that 100 is the new 60 in terms of lifespan. And that has huge implications for things like how we structure our careers, how we structure a pension market, when do we have children, and what do we do with regards to work. And one of the big theses in that book is that if we're going to live on average till 100 years old, we need to be constantly educating, unlearning, and relearning. And I guess I'm an example of that in some sense, because I've spent the past 15 years trying to orientate myself into an investment banking role, rose to the heights of that, where I was a director once I left. And then I'm doing something completely different for the next decade. And I think that's going to be the model going forward for many, many people, is this idea of learning, unlearning, and relearning in different sectors. And so how do we create a culture of that from a very, very young age? Next. So those are quite lofty ideals and nice to talk about in terms of theory and framework. What I thought I would do is actually delve into some case studies of some schools that are doing aspects of this already. So the first of which is School 21. School 21 is a school that was started in East London 7 years ago. And it was one of the schools that was launched out of an initiative launched by Michael Gove and the evil genius Dominic Cummings. And their idea was that instead of having local authorities running and maintaining schools, what we would do is provide funding to any group of teachers, parents, and communities that wanted to open a free school. Because they then they are the best place people to be running these schools. And so School 21, the founders are super interesting. There's 3 founders behind that school. One of them was an education consultant at McKinsey, somebody who had sector experience, but didn't necessarily have experience in the classroom. The other was a guy, Peter Hyman, who was the headmaster of a school in West London. And his background is that he was Tony Blair's chief strategist and chief speechwriter as well, and then decided to become a teacher and subsequently a head teacher. And then somebody who was working at the Department for Education, Ollie Dubuton, not Ollie Dubuton, Ollie, I forget his name, I forget his surname. But the 3 of them decided to combine forces and submit a proposal to the DFE, which got approved. They got the funding from the UK government to set up School 21, and it doesn't take a genius to work out what School 21 is trying to do. They're trying to upskill their pupils for the 21st century. And these guys are geniuses in marketing. What they managed to do was come up with this slogan that they want to rebalance the head, the heart, and the hand aspect of the curriculum. So the head being academic success, which a lot of parents are still focused on, the heart being character and well-being, and then the hand being this focus on generating ideas, creativity, and actually making things. And so what that looks like in practice is 3 really simple things. Number 1, they created a curriculum for oracy and public speaking, which I will speak a bit more about on the next slide. Number 2, they created this culture and value of mastery. So the idea that your first draft is just exactly that. When you're creating a piece of art, for example, you create the piece of art, you get some feedback, and then you iterate and do it again. And then you come back and you iterate and do it again, etc., until you have this finished product that you're really happy with. And their view there is that in school, too often we're focused on quantity and not quality of output. And so what they wanted to do was focus, especially in the arts, on this idea of working deeply on a project for months at a time, as opposed to just ticking off lots of different boxes and doing lots of different projects. And that concept of mastery came about because the first founder, Ed Fido, the guy who was a consultant at McKinsey, had a background in theatre production. And so his view was that we don't spend enough time creating deep work and quality work. And so this idea of mastery was implemented throughout the school in at least the arts. And then another simple idea that they've implemented over the past 7 years is that from year 9, so when these kids are 13 years old, they will spend either half a day or a day in the community. And what that looks like is if they were to have an arts lesson, they would have an art lesson in a branding studio. Or if they were to have a math lesson, it would be in an accountancy firm. And it's just a subtle little shift, but what it does is it takes these subjects that they're learning in an abstract way in the classroom and make them really real. And the school did a fantastic job in creating some corporate partnerships where one day a week or half a day a week, the kids went out into the community and were being involved. And that didn't necessarily mean just taking lessons in a different office environment. They also did things like design posters and create an activist campaign on climate change. And they would research that for a number of weeks across science, history, geography, and math subjects. And then they would go out in the community and share posters and ideas and things about climate change, for example, which is just a beautiful thing if you actually see some of the photos and videos behind that. So that's School 21. And if we can go to the next slide, Petro. They launched an inner curriculum. Can we go back before we start that? They launched an inner curriculum called Voice 21, which they are now passporting into other schools. And they worked with a number of leading linguists and people in the field of communication to develop this curriculum. And some of the things they do include having these assemblies, which are not people sat in rows listening to teachers and head teachers, but they sit in circles and they're really active. If any of you guys have been to sharing circles as adults, it's a very similar kind of concept, and they would break off into smaller groups, be in a little circle, everybody share, and be an active participant in them. They also encouraged every child to give a mini TED talk without any notes. So they would be allowed to prepare, and then they'd have to deliver this mini TED talk in front of the rest of the school, which is quite intimidating. But imagine being trained in that from a young age, as opposed to being thrown into it at 25 in your first job and then you panic. It's again, one of the great things that they decided to do, as well as philosophy and having debates on things like that. The other thing that I thought was super interesting is they flipped the idea of Parents' Evening, where Parents' Evening was this really stuffy thing that you did on an autumn evening when it's cold and wet, and teachers had to stick around till 9 p.m. and everybody was stressed in the days leading up to that. They decided to do away with that, take the workload off the teachers completely and give it as empowerment to the pupils. And so what they said is, okay, on this Parents' Evening, what we're going to do is assemble a couple of your teachers and your parents together, and we're going to sit and watch you give a presentation on your story and the things that you've learned over the past 3 months. And I thought that was just such a beautiful model to just replace what Parents' Evening is about. And it was more about them showcasing their talents and their skills, as opposed to a teacher saying, this is your report card, this is the things they could do better. So now I'll stop talking. I can have some water, and maybe Petro, if you can play the next video, which gives a deeper insight into some of the things that take place at the school. Can you guys hear that, by the way?
No.
The sound not working?
I think if you just press the screen, it should work. Just press, yeah. Oh my god. Exit. No, not exit.
Sorry. Okay. Just gonna have to do this with you guys.
One of our goals here at School 21 is to create interesting people who have passions, who care about the world around them, who want to change things, who are curious. We need to make school once more a place of joy and wonder, where you're being stretched, challenged, and motivated every day.
Could you mute your microphone, Petra?
And goals they want to achieve.
Microphone. Are you muted?
So that sound
We
was
could
better,
hear it,
yes?
but the thing is, you guys have a lot of background noise, so I don't know if it's potentially better that Atish share his screen and plays it, because where he is more quiet.
Atish, is that possible?
Yeah, you're going to have to allow me to be able to.
Yes.
Great. Petra, can you mute? Great.
One of our goals here at School 21 is to create interesting people who have passions, who care about the world around them, who want to change things, who are curious. We need to make school once more a place of joy and wonder, where you're being stretched and challenged and motivated every day.
Who here have dreams and goals they want to achieve in their life?
So at School 21, everything is a jigsaw. By seeing it in action, you see how the different strands feed off each other. Well-being is a way about themselves and about others that go quite deep.
Boys can wear pink and boys can play with bullies. It's their choice.
And through drama techniques, through literature, through conversations with each other and with teachers, students are exploring in a really sophisticated way their emotions, their qualities, what's getting in the way of their learning and getting on.
Does skin colour tell you much about a person on the inside?
No.
So what we're developing, and why well-being links so well to oracy, is that if you're well inside yourself, if you've got confidence, then you will speak.
Isn't this country a democracy?
All communication is up there as one of the most important skills, and we wanted students to find their voice, metaphorically and literally.
Everybody's people.
Oracy and well-being linked to project-based learning, because if they're producing work of a really high standard, that makes them feel better about themselves and really proud of what they've done. It's a very clever way of combining knowledge, skills, and attributes, so you're applying in-depth knowledge to real situations. And I think it's very stimulating for the students. We genuinely believe here in educating the whole child and developing them in all their characteristics so that they can make a difference to the world when they go out of school.
Did that come out okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Great. So that was School 21, but it's not like they're a standalone case. You've also got another school in the north of England, whereas School 21 are really focused on this idea of oracy and speaking and communication, XP School, which is in Doncaster in the north of England, have much more of a focus on discovery-based learning and project-based learning, which means learning from being outside of the classroom and in the real world. And it's a model that they've taken from a chap called Ronald Berger in the US, and a school that he has made quite famous called High Tech High in San Diego. So I'll show you that school quickly as well.
I struggle a lot with my learning and in what I did in primary, and I feel like when I've come here I've learned a lot more
I would say I've never worked so hard in my professional career, but actually I've never enjoyed my teaching so much. It's brilliant.
So yeah, look how big that ring is there. Look. So that must have been a really wet year.
Urban Scroll. Urban Scroll, excellent. Log in.
XP School in Doncaster teaches students through learning expeditions. In its first GCSE results in 2019, subjects taught this way delivered scores more than half a grade higher than the national average. 11 times oversubscribed, it has never hired a single supply teacher in 5 years, and it's permanently excluded just one pupil ever.
We focus on 3 things. Yeah, we focus on character growth, we focus on creating beautiful work, and we focus on academic progress. And we believe that if you focus on growing as a character, you will create beautiful work, and as a consequence of those 2 things, you will achieve academically.
Stanford Tech.
Just a great school. Let me put these back. Present. So hopefully that brings to life what is actually happening, and that's a school which was only open 2 or 3 years ago. I'm actually a little bit gutted because I'm supposed to be at School 21 in 2 weeks' time, but with all the lockdown stuff, they've had to push it back by a couple of weeks, which is a little bit unfortunate. Otherwise, I was really looking forward to spending a bit of time at School 21. But then that leads to a bit of a head scratcher. So everybody knows what we need to do with regards to 21st century skills and changing schools. So what is the biggest obstacle to that happening? And from the educators and the teachers that I speak to, one of the biggest obstacles is this exam culture that we find ourselves in. Because as much as some well-intentioned teachers and senior leaders want to do this, they are hamstrung by GCSE and exam culture. The teachers can't veer off the curriculum too much because they are running to tight schedules. And if anything, GCSEs actually got harder in 2017. They added more stuff into the curriculum, and they require some of the concepts from A-level to now be covered in GCSEs, at least in English, maths and science. But when you think about exams are monitoring performance because that's all they can monitor. They're not necessarily monitoring learning, because learning cannot be seen, whereas performance can. And we've had this unhealthy shift towards really looking at performance and not focusing enough on learning. So over the past couple of years, lots of educators have said we need to move away from assessment of learning to assessment for learning. And so what does that mean? We need to have frameworks in place where the teachers are there not necessarily to grade and mark, but to help people unlock their learning and develop a bit of a love for learning, but the learning is set by goals that they define for themselves. And interestingly enough, the word assessment means to sit beside. It means to spend time with somebody in a way that would help them grow and develop. And we've kind of moved away from that a little bit with standardized assessment, which is all about packing kids in a school hall and getting them to write these exams at the end of 2 or 5 years, and then getting some kind of grade or letter, which they then take with them. And the shift has been away from learning. And what that looks like in kind of psychology terms is a shift away from an intrinsic motivation to learn to an extrinsic desire to pass an exam. So often I hear in school, will this be on the exam, sir? Which is a really tragic thing to hear, especially when you know maybe only 2 or 3 years before that kid had a genuine interest in learning for the sake of learning itself. And it's not just this performance culture that hamstrings schools, it also has an impact on the mental well-being of both the pupils and the teachers. If you look at those same retention stats that I was mentioning early on, one of the things that teachers often state as one of the main reasons they're leaving the profession is because of exams and because of all the marking that goes with that and the pressure that goes with that. worryingly, even more worryingly, about 75% of pupils and their parents said that mental well-being has become much worse with the introduction of the new GCSEs in 2017. And that's just such a startling statistic, that 3 in 4 people think their mental health has gone worse because there was a centrally made decision to make GCSEs more harder. That impacts people on a day-to-day life, and it impacts the parents at the same time as well. But this idea that I'm talking about of scrapping at least GCSEs is not something new. This was well underway before even COVID-19 hit. You had senior MPs, people like Robert Halfon, who is the chair of the Education Select Committee. You had head teachers from the private sector and the public sector. So you had the head teacher there of School 21, as well as teachers from Eton College, King Alfred School, Latimer Upper, some of the big prominent independent schools in the UK, also saying the same thing. But the most vocal voice about scrapping GCSEs has been Lord Baker. Now, this chap is the same man that introduced GCSEs in the 1980s when he was the education minister. And he has said they have outrun their course, which is quite a big influential voice to be stating such a thing. And so that leads the question to, okay, well, if we stop focusing so much on standardized assessment at the age of 16, that opens the floodgates almost in terms of what is school really about and how do we structure and create meaning in school. And for that, COVID-19 has been an incredible thing, because if you spoke to teachers a year ago and you said, maybe they'll scrap GCSE sometime soon, they would have laughed at you. And this is a comment. It took 10 years for them to update to the current GCSEs that we have now. There's no way the stuff that you're talking about would take place in the next 10, 20 years. But overnight, GCSEs and A-levels were cancelled. And what happened is collective belief systems shifted. Something that was seen as a holy cow was sacrificed and had to be sacrificed. And now it's created this idea that maybe we don't need to have standardized assessment, especially when you look at the fact that the UK is the only country in Europe that has standardized testing at the age of 16. Most of Europe does it much later at 18, and most of Europe leaves school at a much later age as well. But then you think, okay, well, fine, get rid of this big blockage which is hamstringing a lot of schools and is hamstringing a lot of teachers. What replaces GCSEs in the 21st century? Because assessment is still important. I'm not against assessment. I'm not against the idea that you should be providing feedback and that you should be telling children where they can improve on something. That is a very important aspect, if not one of the most important aspects of learning and development. But I am against the idea of standardized assessment for masses of the population at such a tender young age. And one of the models that people always point to when they look at education systems in the world that is working is Finland, where they've scrapped standardized assessment. And people celebrate the Finnish system all across the world. And one of the reasons why is because when you get rid of standardized assessment, you open up so much time and resources to focus on some of the things that we saw at School 21 and at XP East. And for me, what's particularly exciting is I've had a look at the manifesto. I've had an insight to be able to see the first draft of the manifesto of the proposed alternative that's floating around government. And one of the ideas is having a digital portfolio, an e-portfolio for every child, which is an incredible idea, because what that means is from a very young age, you start uploading the stuff that you've created onto this digital portfolio, whether it's a game that you've created, whether it's some art that you've created, whether it's your essays, whether it's a blog post that you're quite proud of, whether it's your YouTube channel, all these creative outlets that kids are spending time in, or even from the STEM subjects, so science, things they're doing in sciences, or maybe a math proof that they've come to, all of it goes in there, and it's complemented and augmented with character references written by a 360 community of peers, of parents, and of teachers as well. So there's a deep incentive for the child not to misbehave, because they know that it's going to go on their e-portfolio and maybe have an expiry of 3 to 5 years from that. So someone can look at that and we know that that generation of people are deeply interested in having a digital image and a digital profile, which is super clean, as opposed to my generation where it was celebrated to go out and get drunk and then put it on Facebook. This generation of young people engage in social media in a way which is authentic and it's honest and it's about values and it's about equality. And if you create digital portfolios which showcase who they are in terms of character and their talent and skills, it's much more aligned with how they want to be seen. They don't care how they're seen so much in the physical world. They care much more about how they're portrayed in the digital world. So I think it's a super interesting idea. I shouldn't have seen this manifesto, but someone showed it to me. And it's a great idea of what's really being discussed at the upper echelons of school. And I really like this quote there to just reflect on that for a second. Testing gives you a snapshot and portfolios give you a movie. We all like watching movies. And so I'll wrap up. I'm conscious I've been talking for a lot longer than 25 minutes. I'm just super pumped about everything that's happening in the world of education. But there's two big themes that are happening at the same time. Number one is you've got a new generation of parents coming through. So millennials like myself are going to be the largest population or cohort in the population in the next 5 years. And more interestingly, they're going to start families over the next 5 years. Something in the magnitude of, I've got the number there, 83% of all parents will be, of all new parents will be millennials in 5 years' time. And this group of people have different value systems. Whereas my generation's parents, for all the right reasons, were focused on grades and getting good jobs and having a job for life, these parents care about authentic experiences. They're increasingly liberal, they're data-driven. And that's going to have a huge impact on the things that the education system is designed for, because the parents will be constantly feeding back what they want to see. I did a survey because where I'm going with all of this is I'd like to open a school myself. So I did a survey of around 70 parents in my cohort of people, and 5 of the biggest demands that they talked about are the ones here. They want to see in the school of the future kids learning how to learn, not just what to learn. They want this public speaking and communication skills. More prominently, more recently, a focus on meditation, gratitude, breathwork, compassion, these kind of soft skills where a lot of these adults have had to learn this stuff in their adult life. They'd love to see that in school, and that was something coming out from the questionnaires. And then simple stuff like financial literacy, how to get a mortgage, how to open an ISA, where to save your money, and how to get a loan if you need it, etc. So I think it's really interesting that you've got this trend of people at policy levels talking about schools changing, but you've also got parents coming in who are vocal about what they want to see. And for the first time, we have the great democratizer, which is the internet, where they can really truly express that in a way which will achieve mass scale. I won't talk about that slide, but I'll talk about the second trend, which is how Generation Z, so people who are born after 1995, how they learn. And they're very particular in their learning. This idea, this term of them being digital natives gets bandied about quite loosely. But what that looks like in practice is the way that a young girl or a young boy learns now is very rich in visual content. I know from the tutoring that I'm doing that a lot of the children that I'm tutoring in that age group don't care what their teachers say, because they will go to YouTube to learn it themselves. And there are an army of teachers and people that have provided free content on the internet, whether it's the Khan Academy or anything like that. And they can get the content in a way which they can pause, they can ask comments in the comment section, it's interactive, and they can study what they want as well at the same time. So it's something that's not going to go away, this idea that Gen Z have grown up in this idea where they're not going to listen to the sage on stage. They will choose who they're going to learn from and who they're going to give their attention towards. And they're also increasingly spending time playing and creating games as well. So that's something which I believe is going to have to become more and more incorporated into schools if schools are going to have a lasting impact and a lasting place in the community, is meeting the children where they're at, which is playing games and creating games. And you've seen that in the rise of things like Roblox and Minecraft, if any of you have kids or know kids that are engaged in those games. And the other thing is they love to learn and study along with their peers. So there's this thing now on YouTube called StudyTube. It's basically all these YouTubers who are studying, and they'll create a 7-hour video of study with me with some music in the background, but it's very peer-based. And if you look at some of these accounts, they're huge. People like Unjaded Jade or Vika Tibu, etc. These are kids who are only 20 years old, but they are the voice that people are listening to when it comes to studying, self-growth, how to feel about your A-level results, etc. People, these 16-year-olds are looking to 20-year-olds, not to even people of my age, for advice and guidance on that stage of their life. And it's super, super interesting that is happening, because it means that you no longer have to be an expert with 20 years of teaching experience under your belt to have the attention of the children. In fact, the people that they most resonate with is someone who's recently gone through that experience with them, as them 2 to 3 years ago. And you've seen the rise of these study and empowerment YouTubers with hundreds of thousands of followers. Now, I don't like these broad brush generalizations on people by age. I think they can be a little bit condescending at times. But when you contrast Gen Z with the baby boomers, so people before Gen X and millennials, there are some stark contrasts. Someone who's going to learn, and that has a huge impact for me, for example, in terms of how do I go about creating a classroom environment, because they no longer are looking at me like a teacher. They're looking at me as a facilitator of their own learning, and they are self-paced in their own learning. So how do I tailor my Sage on Stage to actually just helping them in a much more bespoke manner based on the work that they've already done? They're very collaborative. I think I've mentioned this kind of theme of them working together with their peers, as well as looking up to some of these study tubers. And they are learner-centric. They will learn what they are interested in, and they have the internet at their fingertips, so they don't necessarily need to look at the curriculum. You can go on YouTube or any other platform, Udemy, for example, and learn exactly what you want to learn from who you want to learn it from. And I think that's a super interesting trend, which again is not going to go away. So the last thing I would say is that not everybody agrees with this idea that schools need to fundamentally change what they're about. There's some big voices in education like Daisy Christodoulou, who state these 7 myths of education. And if I can just highlight some of them, the first there is we should still teach facts and still have a focus on knowledge, not just focusing on skills and skills and skills. And I think she's got a point there. Where she's really getting to is we don't need to revolutionize schooling per se. We need to add some things to schooling, but there are aspects of schooling that really work, whether it's explicit teaching, whether it is the idea of giving knowledge to children so that they become domain experts. There are aspects of school that really do work, especially this idea of having an authority figure and somebody to look up to and listen to. So her point, or my takeaway from her point, is that it's all well and good people talking about a revolution in education, but a revolution implies that you need to scrap the whole thing. And actually there are some good aspects to the way education is currently set up, and we should keep some of the good aspects there, especially this idea of we should still teach knowledge even if you can Google things, because there are times where you don't have your phone next to you, or there are times of creativity comes from having a domain base of knowledge and experiences that you can then connect the dots from. And so it's really important to have that. So in conclusion, society is rapidly changing and its economies are rapidly changing, and schooling has to and will have to adapt to keep abreast of all of that. And one other point I'd like to make is STEM subjects, science, tech, engineering, and maths are increasingly in focus, and rightly so, because people think that there is going to be a big automation of jobs in the future. It is coming, in my opinion, at the expense of the arts, of music and dance, to a large extent, and it comes in the funding and it comes in the focus. And if you look at what the drivers of creativity are, they come from these creative pursuits, and to strip them out of the curriculum because we all have this massive insecurity about the future of AI and our place as humans and our value as humans in a digital age does not mean that we need to dehumanize the curriculum at the same time. And I'm really passionate about that. And if you want another voice in that space, it's Sir Ken Robinson. He's got the most watched TED Talk of all time called "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" And it's a fascinating expose on exactly what schools are not doing and how that is ultimately killing the creativity of our children. So lots of things to be careful of as we move forward. But I've talked for way longer than I should have done, Petronella. I do apologize about that. This is something I could talk about for hours and hours, as you can probably tell. But I hope that was useful, and yeah, more interested to hear what everybody's thoughts are and to have a discussion with people.
Wonderful, Atish, thank you so much. It was great to have you speak for longer. It was very generous of you, and I learned a huge amount. I've been taking notes, so thank you to share with people. So now we're going to move into a kind of more of a discussion. If people have any questions about some of Atish's points or references, or just have a kind of topic that they'd like to contribute, something that they'd like to contribute to get a conversation going. You just want to raise your hand if you have it. Okay, Josh. Asking to unmute.
Yeah, so it's hard to hear you, Petronella. I didn't mean to speak over you. Yeah, thanks for the talk. I appreciate it. It's really nice and confirms a lot of things I guess I've been thinking about. But one of the questions that I would ask is, what are the types of schooling? Like, what I'd like to know is basically a high-level topology of the types of schools and the various kind of values and beliefs that they all hold. So, like, you know, there's the Steiner schools, there is democratic free schooling, there are all kinds, there's these School 21s, etc. So, I guess what would be interesting is like a meta-analysis on the types of schooling and that kind of stuff to kind of sift through. Would you happen to have any idea where to find one of those?
I don't. I mean, I've got a general kind of awareness of the things you're talking about, so the Montessori schools, the Steiner schools, etc. I think the point I would stress is they are such a small portion of the schooling offering. So my experience has only been in the UK, but in the UK you have three options as a parent. You can send your kid to a private school, which has pros and cons. The pros of that are that they typically have a very good focus on sports. You have some excellent teaching, often people who have industry experience in another sector, and then have gone into teaching, and you have a much more broader focus on character development as well. But it comes at not only a financial cost, but it comes at a perception cost as well. It's quite elitist in nature, and there's a lot of pushback in the UK about sending kids to private schools and whether we should have a private education system at all. So the first option as a parent is you send your kid to a private school. The second and the most popular option is that you send your kid to a state school. And state schools are a mixed bag. You either have a grammar school, which is a very good, well-funded institution that a lot of parents want to send their kids to because for legacy reasons, they were the old schools that traditionally had a lot more funding in terms of the land that they had, the resources that they could equip their students with, and they've managed to retain some of those teachers as well. The teachers want to teach at the grammar schools. And then you've got the comprehensive schools where they're a real mixed bag. It depends on which area you're in. It's a bit of a lottery. And there's some really good schools and some really good teachers in the comprehensive schools, and there's some not very good ones. So that's the second kind of option. And then the third, I would say, is the stuff you're talking about, which is the alternative schooling models. And within that, you've also got homeschooling and unschooling, which are both rising in popularity, especially in a post-COVID world. I know, for example, just as anecdotal evidence, many parents that have decided to deregister their children from the education system that were in either public school or in private school, from both cohorts, because they feel they can do a better job themselves. And they feel like the internet is a great enabler in terms of delivering the content. And in parallel, you're seeing homeschooling communities pop up. So different groups of parents that can then create the social aspect of schooling with each other's children. And that is only going to rise over time. As for the topology of all the different types of schools, Steiner, Montessori, etc., I'm sure a quick Google search would find the 7 or 8 different models that are out there in schooling. But from what I understand, schools like the one that I showed you, XP East, they follow something called project-based learning, PBL, and they are an interesting segment of the education space, because even Montessori is all about being in nature, and it's about play, and it's learning through being in the world. So maybe there's some overlap between just the general field of project-based learning schools and then Montessori and Steiner within
that. Hi Atish, first I wanted to say, like, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. You're so like professional, like so neat, like, and I really like all the information you pulled out. I think one is like, I'd love to have the survey you had, 70 parents take. If I could have it, that would be great, because I would love to kind of see the type of question you asked them. Also, because here at around Plum Village, we're going to start the process of also creating a school here.
Yeah.
So there's more conversation there. But I'm really curious about what's been going on in your learning doing your PGC. Like, what are the values or the ontology or the principles that you see that how's the teacher training happening, basically? Because
Yeah.
I think, like, how the teacher training is a key dimension of, like, I guess, the success of a teacher once he's on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would really love to know how has that teacher training been so far for you? What do you see that their values that they've been maybe expressing through it? Maybe what are some flaws? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the first kind of caveat emptor there is the fact that I'm only just starting that. So actually the course starts itself in September. So I've only had all the pre-reading and pre-materials to do. And
okay, got it.
In a normal world, I would be in school and have been in school in the past couple of months as like a orientation kind of exercise leading up to that. And they would have sent me plenty of information to digest. What I can tell you from the stuff that they've told me to read and look at is that teacher training is so slow to adapt to some of the stuff that we're talking about. Because number one, it's very domain specific. So I'm training to become a maths teacher, and a lot of the pedagogy that we're learning is with regards to math and how to teach math in the best possible way. And so there'll be plenty of examples of using a visual model to teach some simple algebra concept, for example. The kind of broader, more macro issues on schooling and how schooling is set up and how kids behave and what they should be learning, etc. I don't see a focus on the curriculum that I have been given for the next 9 months on those topics. I think the university providers, you've got basically two teacher training routes that are predominant. You've got a university-led teacher training route where you are studying theory and pedagogy for one term, and then you're in school applying it for the rest of the time. Or you're 100% in school and you're doing all your teacher training in school on the job. Both those models, and given that I'm doing one of them and know plenty of people that have gone through both options, are again just very focused on getting you qualified as quickly as possible to be in front of 30 kids and deliver the curriculum. And I think you're absolutely right. If we're going to have a change in the education sector, there needs to be these types of discussions, not at the pub after school, but deeply baked within the teacher training itself. And I think that would also do wonders for teacher recruitment at the same time.
Great. So if I kind of get it, it's like if I recreate, you just started, so you're not sure, but it's like basically they're mostly teaching you of how to teach math. Maybe
Yes.
there's not so much space for discussion about the ontology of the child and what stage he's there's maybe less thing really focused on child development or human development, and that's something that you see might be a bit missing at the moment, and their focus is like, let's get you trained so you can get started.
That's my interpretation of the materials I've been given to prepare for.
Can I come in on that a little bit?
Yep.
Yeah, so I remember when I did my PGC 10 years ago now, but they jokingly called it, some of the other people and my tutor in fact called it a FOFO course, which meant something off and find out. And basically saying that you learn very little from the university, but as soon as you stand in front of 30 children in the classroom, you start to learn very quickly. But I would say that as part of the PGC experience, you obviously have to look into the sort of philosophies of teaching and pedagogy. And in amongst that, you'll find aspects of it that are more aligned to the sort of direction that you're talking about wanting to go with education. So the person that stands out for me was a guy called Vygotsky, which you will almost certainly encounter. He talks about the zone of proximal development and the role of a teacher as a scaffolder and a facilitator. So the ideal role of a teacher there is to know the kids so well that, and to know the sort of ladder that the curriculum is, where they have to get to, skills-based and knowledge-based, know where the child is, so when they walk into the classroom, the zone of proximal development is what they think of as like the furthest reach for the next step, and then the role of the teacher is to provide the best step to facilitate the greatest reach of that sort of student. So I think you'll find that a lot of the more progressive student-focused ideas are in amongst it in the wash, and when you're doing the sort of master's level research aspects of the PGCE, you have an opportunity to go into it, but I think really to go into it in any more detail, you'd be doing a different course. As I think you said, Atish, the real thing is to get you spat out as quickly as possible into a classroom.
Yeah, the trade-off they have, and I've had this discussion with my teacher training provider at Oxford, is they have to balance the quality of the teacher training versus the quantity of teachers that they are required to create. And I think it's a really short course, right? 9 months, and then suddenly you're qualified to teach a classroom full of people. And to David's point, I think there's a lot of this idea that you'll just figure it out whilst you're on the job. And the other stuff, the onus is really on you to either do further level study on child psychology and child development, or to do it in your spare time and see what extent it complements your teaching. But I wouldn't say it's deeply baked into the teacher training.
Well, great, that's amazing. Thank you for the information, because I think it reflects a little bit the what is it that they're addressing, or yeah, it's like 9 months is extremely short.
It's crazy short, yeah.
Although your first year of teaching is also part of the process, so you then become an NQT, and then you get the QTS after the first year of teaching. So that first full-time teaching year is sort of part of the training. I've got quite a, I think I probably a little bit like you, Atish. I could probably talk forever about all this stuff, but is it okay if I talk a little bit?
Of course.
Yeah. So yeah, so I'm going into this new school in the Congo with a great amount of freedom, because they're looking to me really to set most of it up. I've got experience with setting up a school in Bhutan, where I was involved quite heavily in the sort of meditation side of it. You know, we did meditation at the start of every lesson, and there was a big drive to incorporate the principles of gross national happiness into the curriculum over there. And, you know, I think Bhutan generally tends to embody a lot of the, broadly speaking, the kind of things we're talking about here. I mean, over there, though, you still found the same problem. I went to a 4-day GNH workshop where teachers were being trained how to bring the principles of GNH into the curriculum. And all of it was, you know, talking from to the class to the teachers. They got them inspired. They went back to school. They did it for a week or two, and then it all drifted away. A bit like what you were saying earlier, I tried to get the Bhutanese government to look to the textbooks. If you want cognitive conflicts at the start of every lesson, incorporate them into the textbooks, and the teachers will do it unthinkingly, just as they do currently from the textbooks. You know, you can get it underneath and get it working. Yeah, so, I mean, a lot of the things that you've said have resonated with me, and I agree with pretty much all of it. I think underneath every aspect of it, there's a lot of complexity. The exam boards in particular, I think, is a really pernicious situation, because they're run like businesses and they're competitive. So it's in everybody's interest to sort of drive down the standards of education so that all the stakeholders do better out of it, which is an alarming situation. A couple of things that I'd be interested to sort of continue a conversation with you into the future with a view to what I'm going to be doing in the Congo, because I'm in a situation where I'm trying to figure out the best way to take the model as it is and the expectations of teachers and I think the students in the Congo, which will be a very traditional base, I think, and try to find out how much I can sort of bend and push education in a direction that feels to have more integrity to me. A couple of things I'd recommend is the education podcast by the Futurenauts, Ian Wilkinson and the Futurenauts. They talk about, every episode of that podcast is about, it's in 3 parts. The first part is, pardon my language, hope nobody's too sensitive, but this is the podcast. The first part of it is how fucked are we? The second part of it is how did we get this fucked? And the third part of it is how do we unfuck ourselves? And the education one's quite informative, and it speaks to a lot of the things you're saying. One of the things I'm hoping to do in the Congo, if I can, is take things like this. Like, you know, they deal with fashion and climate change and nature. Everyone's different. And it's somebody very high up in sustainability and somebody very high up in sort of progressive futurology, whatever that might be. But things like this need to find their way into education. So I'll have to do assemblies all the time. In 2 of the schools that I've worked at, I've got plastics banned, and it's taken a year in each of them, trying to get that a student-led sort of thing. And trying to bring things like that, trying to bring the crises of the real world into the classroom in a way that doesn't just terrify everybody and is accessible and empowers children, I think is one of the most important things that I'm going to be trying to do. So I'm hoping to, at the very least, come up with a set of assemblies that match the Futurenaut curriculum, almost in that respect. The other, so sort of make schemes of work or something like them. The other aspect I think is so overlooked in education and just never appears in the curriculum really anywhere is cognitive biases and sort of heuristics. And so I've done assemblies on them in my capacities in other schools where I don't have a great deal of influence. I'm just somebody who bangs on at the head until he lets me stand in front of the school and say stuff. But so I haven't encountered anywhere, I don't know if you have, but I haven't encountered that as some form of curriculum. It has to happen outside of the subjects. you either find ways to incorporate it into them, which I have done with science. I've done like lessons on the sharpshooter fallacy and things like that. But you know, again, they're always standalone. They can't be part of the curriculum. It talks about what you were saying about teachers having trouble veering off curriculum. So again, in this capacity as head of secondary, I'll be able to just take a cognitive bias and find a way to communicate and share that with the students and try and incorporate it.
I think that's great, David. I think that's amazing. I haven't seen any examples of cognitive biases being introduced and discussed and frameworks for mitigating them, even in higher education. Never mind secondary.
Well, it's a bit like what you were saying about the meditation and compassion stuff. Like, it's stuff that we've, in our generation, come to sort of late in our life, maybe because we flirted with Buddhism or something, or nowadays because Gwyneth Paltrow's making vagina-flavoured candles and whatnot. But eventually we find these things and then we stumble our own way through them. And just fundamentally, the idea that in all of our schooling, pretty much, we're not teaching students how they think. We're talking, you know, teaching how they learn and the mistakes that you make when you learn, you know, all those cognitive biases. I should probably write all this down at some point and just ping it into the thing. But a documentary I'd recommend is Unschooling the World, which is quite an alarming watch, but it's what happens when you take, and I've experienced this directly in Bhutan and a little bit in Africa. I've just come back from Kenya. But the impact that our model of education has on the developing world is just appalling. We essentially unskill every community that we put a school into. We create a third of the cohort can access the global economy, and the rest go home and have no idea how anything works anymore. So they don't want to be there. So they leave the farms and they head to the cities. So our schooling actually powers and drives forward the collapse of the economic systems. Everyone moves into the cities, there's nothing there for them. And I've experienced that directly in Bhutan. The top third of the kids in Bhutan will get the rest of their education paid for by the government. They'll often go as far as university in Canada, America, or the UK. Because they're very patriotic in a fairly good and not nationalistic way, they often go back and they form the top band of the civil service. If you didn't make it into that category, then you form the next band of the civil service. You go into teaching or the traffic police or things like that. If you don't get into that, the very lowest rung is teaching. So teaching there is institutionalized failure, but not, you know, it's the first tier of success, but it's the bottom tier of failure, if you know what I mean. And I don't know if you ever heard it, but usually you're more happy with a bronze medal than a silver medal. That's a bit of a tangent. The one other thing I'd say is PISA, which is the organization that effectively, you know, ranks all different education. They do know about this, and the stuff you were showing about this came out of that podcast, the education one, but the Future Notes. But PISA are, I think, getting quite clued up about the fact that education doesn't function anymore and isn't fit for service. And they're trying to find ways to switch to the C's instead of the R's. But obviously, I think one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in now is that it's very easy to grade. We're basically marking people on the things that are easy to grade, and the things that we want them to be able to do and what we want people to become aren't very easy to grade. So there's sort of a fundamental problem there. And if anything, we've fallen into the path of least resistance with the education we've got, and the creativity to turn it around seems to be the challenge. But yeah, so I just felt like I had quite a lot to say, and I didn't do that in a very discussion-based way because I just sort of blurted it all out. But yeah.
No, that's amazing, David. Thank you so much for your sharing, because like Atish, you mentioned Finland, and one thing that you say is like actually in Finland, being a teacher is the kind of like, if you were a man, being like the hottest job you could get to for a spouse would be doctor, then teacher, and for a woman would be teacher. And actually they take the top students, to become a teacher, they only take the top best. and it takes 5-year training to become a teacher. It's like they really treat it like, oh my God, you know, that's a prestigious job to have. And also it's not super like you're not going to ever make lots of money, but you're going to have a decent life. I think
they pay teachers as they pay doctors, I believe, in Finland.
Yeah, like, but how to say, like, you're not going to become a billionaire out of become a teacher, but you're going to have a decent life, you know, and it's a very respectable. And I think there's really one thing that you say is like, oh, like the bronze, like teach what you said about Bhutan is like, oh, it's the bronze medal. It's not we don't treat, and education is our future. We don't treat our future as like, oh my God, we're really going to invest, you know, our best people to become the teachers. And the other thing, it seems that they give them a lot of autonomy. They really train them, but they give a lot of autonomy for the teacher to kind of make the decision in the classroom, and they screen extremely early for any learning disability, and they address that very early. And about like a quarter of students in their lifetime until 18 will have at some point a need for like additional support. That'd be like dyslexia or ADHD, or, you know, as like that is actually quite common. And they don't have like, you know, classes, everyone's mixed. So you don't have like an elite class of like, okay, you know, we separate, we have class for the high achieving students and one for the others. So I found that these information are quite kind of interesting to kind of see. I think like really kind of trusting the teachers and empowering them to be able to facilitate their class. I think is really important, because like teachers are the one on the ground who really see the kids. But Atish, I just went on a side thing about Finland.
No, but it's a super valid point, which is the way that a society treats its teachers says a lot about how it values its current education system. And no better example is there than Finland. I think in the UK, teaching has fallen into this kind of low common denominator where you have somebody delivering the curriculum, doing a bit of behavior management, and basically policing the classroom. And I've heard that phrase from many teachers, and it's not the reasons why I'm going into the profession, but it is one of the reasons why the retention rate is so low, because people go into teaching with an idea of what teaching is, and then they are hamstrung they meet school and they realize, this is all about being a social worker and dealing with children that have really bad homes, and I have to deal with the emotional fallout of that. They realize, okay, well, I'm here actually just to deliver the curriculum in a certain deadline and to hit certain criteria. And then they realize that actually they're not going to make any meaningful money. In fact, they're going to earn much less than the national average for a long period of time. So all those kind of factors contribute to somebody who on the margin will think, well, I'm just going to leave. I can do something else.
We do get the holidays.
You do get that.
My sister just qualified to become a teacher in France. And in France, how it works is you have to take an exam. And she also, what was very interesting, she said per region is very different, but because, for example, in near Paris, there's a high demand for teachers. So therefore they will take people that are not really like, for example, in the Ile-de-France, you have a lot more chance. If you take the exam in Ile-de-France, you have a lot more chance to get in than, let's say, south of France, because there's less need. But it's just, you just pass a national exam, and then you start teaching right straight away. Like, and you do part-time 1 year at the fac, at the university, and then you're already on the ground. That's for And I just found that like a bit, and also there's a generally like a feeling for me, it's not, but like a lot of people who applied to become teachers are attracted by the holidays and by the security of the job, and not always by like, oh, this is a vocation.
In the after the financial crash in 2007-8, there was a huge upsurge in people coming primarily from the finance and IT arena, and the same's just happening now with the corona. So it is people jumping on. But the other thing is that when I did my PGCE, I was paid more to do my PGCE than I earned in my first year of teaching, and that's actually gone up. You get, I think it's 34 grand you get now to train to teach, and the teacher training part of it is a business just like anything else. They want to fill the seats. So there's at that stage, there's in terms of applying to get on the course, there's very little. You just have to have a degree in the subject, really, I think, unless it's changed. And then when it gets to the end, it's in their interest to pass you, because just like schools, they're Ofcommed. So, you know, the quality of their provision is ranked.
Yeah. If I can just pick up the baton on that point there, David, you're absolutely right. The teacher training are incentivized. Teacher training providers are incentivized to take on anybody almost, and you've seen the rise of, so you've got PGCE, which is run by traditional universities, and they've had an offering for a number of years, and they never reach the maximum enrollment that they can for their course. So they're happy just to have people to interview. But you've also got these teacher training providers who are affiliated with schools, but they are paid the same as a university would be paid for tuition fees. And there's hundreds of them. And they're not very good, some of these people, but they get the rubber stamp from a nearby university. And you're right, they are run for profit by people that don't care that deeply about the education sector. They just care. These are entrepreneurs that see a school in demand of teachers. They see a university that will rubber stamp their qualification, and they say, look, you give your £9 grand a year tuition fee to me, and I will do your teacher training for you.
Mental.
It's mental, and it's unfortunately the government response has been one of desperation. They are in such short supply of teachers that they will just throw more money at it. And you're right, you get a tax-free bursary of up to £34,000 in the UK to do it. So what a lot of graduates do, and this makes me so upset, but I can understand the logic, is they think, I will go and do my PGCE, I will earn this tax-free bursary, and then I will go and do what I really want to do. Or, like as a stepping stone, basically, as a year just to figure stuff out. Or worse, they go to the Middle East and teach in a school in the Middle East. And that there's nothing wrong there. Everyone deserves an education. A child is a child. But we've invested the money for the community here in the UK where there's a desperate need, and then they're paid privately in a different country somewhere else for that. And that's in huge numbers, the people that go to either Singapore or the Middle East for the lifestyle and for the paycheck.
I've heard of somebody who deliberately failed their PGC so they could do it again.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
I think that the thing you said earlier as well about, I don't want to be careful not to be too negative about things at the moment, but you know, I've taught in many different environments. I started off in a comprehensive school. I went from there to Bhutan, which was essentially voluntary. And over there, the teachers are actually in the same category as a guru. Just like they believe you can't make spiritual progress without a guru to help you along the way, they think of teachers as the same. So you get an incredible amount of respect there. Too much, in fact. I wanted a kid to, I don't know, pick a chair up and throw it after 6 months. But they were very respectful. And then I taught in a private school in Scotland for a year. And then I came back to a school that was actually had been failed because of a very poor uptake of PBL. They did it in a very bad way and the school got failed. And then I went back to 2 years in a comprehensive school and just south of Bristol. And it was in that second year that I looked abroad again and went to Kenya. But I spent the first year in that comprehensive school south of Bristol being quite a negative influence in the staff room, which was totally unlike me. I'd never been that. But I would find myself just casually banging on about how the education system doesn't work and what a joke it is with my fellow teachers. And you mentioned it's a bit like being a social worker, but it's a bit like being a social worker with none of the information that a social worker has. So you're presented with the behaviours without any of the understanding of what is underneath it. And I remember, like, for me, one of the most rewarding and felt experiences of teaching is parents' evenings. Because, you know, you might go to a parents' evening and there's a kid in your class that is just an absolute nightmare who steps into the room with a deliberate intention to undermine everything that happens. And in that school, there would be classes of 15 or 16 kids, the ghettoized classes, the ones that were all indoctrinated with the idea of failure, basically, and that was their experience of school. You might have 8 or 9 kids who are like that. And any one of them would have the power to disrupt and end and ruin the lesson. And you'd be expected to manage the situation, and you could remove children from the classroom, but you can't remove 8 children from a classroom. So most of the time you'd be coping with that situation. And you might get to a parents' evening and you think, you know what you're going to say about this kid. It's basically, you've got to help me sort this kid out because he's ruining everything for everybody else. You start off with the conversation and very quickly you realise it's not the kid, it's the parents. And you know, the parent might turn to the kid and you can see that this is going to get violent when you leave parents' evening, and immediately you're trying to pull it back in. It's like, he's actually quite a nice kid, really. He's just finding it very difficult to be in a classroom. I don't really, you know. And you never have access to that information, which means I got to the point where I honestly felt that the second year there, I tried my best. I had serious words with myself over the summer holiday and thought, I'm not walking out on this. I'm going to make it good. And I went in as positive as I could. And by January, February, I was driving home and I just thought, whatever I do in this situation, it's toxic. It gets in, and I can't live up to it. I can't do it. So I am one of those teachers that fell out of the system for all the reasons that we're talking about, and went to a school in Kenya which had much lower expectation on the academics, had much more of a sense of community. We were all planting trees together and stuff like that. And it's a school as a community that feels like a nice place to be in. 3 weeks before the end of term, teachers aren't looking at the calendar and the clock and looking all drawn and haggard. They're going, oh my God, we've only got 3 weeks left. I mean, we're going to have an amazing holiday, but we've only got 3 weeks left. They were enjoying being there. And, you know, the difference, a headmaster, an interview, I was asked, what do you look for when you observe a lesson? And, you know what you're supposed to answer to that question. You know, it's differentiated resources, every kid making progress, and it's evidenced, and all these stock phrases. But fundamentally, it's, there was a TED lecture by Benjamin Zander, who's a classical musician, and it's about it's about how everybody should love classical music. They just don't know it yet. But he flipped his success criteria from the work he did after working in conflict zones, and he said that he stopped with all these things that we might be talking about here, and he just put it down to how many shining eyes do I see around me in the room. And that's his measure of success. And if I go into a classroom and I see all the kids are like going towards something instead of being pulled towards something, and if you see them smiling and happy, then whatever the teacher's doing, fine. You know, you don't need a PGCE. You just, as long as you're delivering the curriculum and the kids are engaged and excited and feel that they're doing something. And I think a lot of that can be done with just really little tricks. There's no revolution required. Just like, you know, cognitive conflicts and strange things at the start of the lesson, just anything and gamification. But I'm talking too much again, I'll just shut up.
No, not at all. And my takeaway from what you're saying is you have environments where teachers want to teach and they want to work in those environments. And what tends to happen is that these schools where the parents are a part of the problem is they become this cesspool of all the bad kids and all the bad parents. And the teachers gravitate towards the private schools, or they gravitate towards the grammar schools, like I was saying earlier. And the service provision for these tough schools is really low. And I hear what you're saying about the parents being part of the problem. I can give an insight into the zeitgeist of the times. There's a TV show, you may have heard of it, in urban culture, called Top Boy. It takes all these like hip hop and grime artists, and they act out a day in East London, etc. It's got plenty of seasons and lots of funding. But there's a scene in there where the 16-year-old boy has his parents' evening, and his mum can't make it, so his older brother comes with him. And they have the parents' evening, and the teacher's like, look, he's not really behaving in school, he's not doing all this stuff. And the older brother goes, listen, you don't talk about my little brother like that, and gets really angry at the teacher. He's like, it's your fault that he's not doing so well. He says that you pick on him and you're mean, and I'm not having it. And he ultimately like punches him in this scene, right? And it's just a sense of this anger, because there's, on the one hand, an entitlement from some of these parents, which is, I'm going to send my kid to school, you're going to look after them, it's your responsibility to educate them and to feed them, and I take no responsibility, right? And I would broad brush it under the term of social care. Like, that becomes the teacher's responsibility, and it's such a painful aspect of the job. It's something I've only had to witness, fortunately, on a tangential basis, but I'm going to be in that world, and it's really kind of unfortunate. And how do you address that when social care itself is so underfunded and there's so little people that are experienced enough to deliver that?
You as a teacher by yourself, like, I had similar experience teaching in like where I grew up. It's just like, you by yourself as a teacher, you can't do much. It takes a community to educate a child, and instruction and education is different. It's like, I've really experienced this, like, oh, you know, you go to, like, it's like like they park their kids in school. It's like, okay, you know, like, but there's really a limit of how you can act as a teacher by yourself. And also, let's say you as a teacher, you have a lot of goodwill, but like, having the whole school support as your other pairs of teachers, like, you know, having alignment with your other teachers who are your colleagues and the headmasters. But it's really an active community. And when there is no community, when there's fragmentation, and when there's you know, no relatedness, when you don't know what's going on in the life of a child, it's just extremely difficult to have any way of like living the suffering of the child. Because like, I think like the brain is really like, if you feel unsafe, how can you absorb any information? How can you learn? Like, learning comes from first like being safe, emotionally safe, physically safe. And if the kid is not safe at home, and if the kid will really be able to thrive. I think education is an active community. And it's also really fascinating to see like the different, you know, value system. You know, when I train in Steiner, like Steiner would have a certain philosophy that is being like shared with the children, and then they go to school, and then the parent have a different value system. Or even like normal French school, like is saying like, oh, like believing in the Republic, and then girls and boys are equal, and you go home and the dad is like, you know, no, like women are not, you know, like literally not wanting a boy to play la terre in French is feminine, like the earth is a feminine role. So it's just like, it's really, for me, what I really see, and why I'm excited to kind of create the school here at near Plum Village, is to create is an active community, that you create a school, that school is really the heart of community, because it's your children together. Your children get formed with other children and with other families. I went a little bit long, so I'm going to shut up too.
And there's, Sylvie, just to pad out your point.
Lost you guys.
Can you hear me? Sylvie, just to pad out your points, I went to this fascinating talk, and it was all on the neurochemicals behind learning. and you said all this stuff about feeling safe. And I tried to find the slides, I'll send them to you after, but they were breaking down the need for having an adequate level of dopamine and not flooding dopamine in your system when you're learning, balancing oxytocin, which is all about love and safety and comfort, norepinephrine, having this sense of like some deadline and some authority. And it was fascinating. It was by a neuroscientist who was an ex-teacher, decided to become a neuroscientist. If I can find the slides, it just really is a lot of research to what you were kind of talking about in that regards. The other thing I would say as well, just we've picked up on this topic of parental engagement, but there is a body of research which says that parental engagement is one of the top 3 to 4 key determinants of a child's success in school. And I've loved absorbing some of that research, because if I think about myself and my beautiful parents that were on earlier, I didn't go to a great school. I didn't have really good teachers, and it certainly didn't have the funding. But I had parents that valued education, and they were interested and active in my education. I could show them my work, and they would celebrate my work to the extent they're still doing it 30 years later. And it's a really nice aspect, which is society's problem to crack. How do you create parents that are really engaged in their child's learning?
And if I could add to that as well, just sort of tagging back a little bit, you find a lot of the parents that we were talking about previously would have been the same kid at school, going through the same experience the generation before. So, you know, the sort of blame on the parents, or the fault, is just that they went through the same process. You know, education didn't work for them. One of the things I found very difficult in the school that went under was that the kids seemed to, for want of a better word, because I hate it, but they seemed a bit woke to the whole thing. Like they seemed to get it that school wasn't serving them. And in some cases, it'd be very sort of pragmatic. Like when I'd say something like, you know, I used to say things like, well, you know, you've got to be in school, so you can either come out with decent GCSEs or not. Whatever else you do in school, you might as well come out with the GCSEs rather than not. You know, you don't know what chances and what choices they might give you later. And I remember one kid turning around to me and said, "Nah, sir, yeah, I don't need them." I'm like, you know, why? And he said, well, my dad failed his GCSEs, never went to school. We've got a big house down the road, a house in Tenerife, a couple of Land Rovers. You know, he's an electrician. He's never needed his education. And at that point, I remember the conversation. I'm sort of like, what to say? I mean, in my head, I'm thinking, well, they aren't all the things that you value in life. And, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, curiosity and lifelong learning, all this. But I think in the end, I just looked at him, trying to figure out what it all meant. But you know, kids are starting to get cotton on to the fact that having a GCSE in geography or history isn't going to help them when they get out of school very much.
Thank you.
Of your presentation. Like overall opinion, the A level and will change it or will take appeals and things like that. Does the teacher feel like something good may come out of this, or is there a lot of like just uncertainty? Like, I guess I'm just interested in seeing like what the teachers are wanting to do moving forwards after this has happened. Like, do you have any insight in that about that at all?
1 second, sorry, I missed the start of that. My Zoom is playing up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I had trouble hearing as well.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, come on.
I think we missed the first half of what you said.
It was basically just like what you kind of as a teacher, like, and as, do you know what other teachers' thoughts are on moving forward after the A level and G cancellation, and obviously like new results that have come out, like, and how you're planning on moving forward with in regards to like student support, I guess?
Yeah, so generally the sentiment has been one of outrage at the whole set of circumstances. And I've spoken to a handful of teachers, and generally the feeling is that the system has been unfair to large populations of their schooling and cohort. Nobody is arguing to scrap A-levels, by the way. But A-levels are something which people feel are a key way of assessing at the end of an education system. So I think a lot of the debate that I was having was more with regards to GCSEs in subjects like David said about geography, where what can you really assess in an exam about geography when it's something that's out there in the real world. And also universities need a way to decide from an academic perspective on who to take onto their course, and A-levels can be a good way of filtering out. The numbers that I've seen behind this manifesto, which I've seen with regards to where do we go if we have an alternative form of assessment, is the majority of teachers believe that formative assessment is an important aspect. So formative assessment means how do we create systems of assessment which benefit not just the pupil, but they benefit the teacher, because learning is a two-way feedback thing. The pupil needs to know if they're learning, but the teacher also needs to know if they're effective in their learning. I think the big argument is, do we need standardized testing where we send the exam papers off to these external examiners and they all mark it, and we have no real kind of insight even to how the pupil did. We never see their paper unless we request it post an exam either. I'm sorry, I don't know if I really answered your question.
No, that was good. That also like cleared it up as me as well. I don't really understand the British education system because I didn't grow up there. So getting that, getting clear about like the A-levels and the GCSEs and the difference and stuff was also really good. But yeah, thank you.
One thing I'd add to that is, I mean, at the moment there is serious problems with the A-levels, and I'm not sure what's being done, what work's going on to fix it. But a few years ago they were made a lot harder, and the problem now isn't so much that they're hard. It's just they're quite fundamentally not fit for purpose. They're no use to universities really anymore, because if you take the example of physics, last year there was 17 percentage marks between an E and an A. So an E was like 42 and an A was 17 percentages above that. So your grades being determined by 2 or 3 percentages, but also if it's 61% for an A and 90% for an A university can no longer determine which is the best student. The A stars are entirely statistical, so the top, like, I don't know, 0.5% or whatever, regardless of the mark, get the A star. I mean, they are quite fundamentally at the moment not fit for purpose, but I don't know how that's going to improve. But I went on a CPD thing once where they just went through an exam paper, and I was in the room with people who've been teaching physics, some of them for 20, 25 years, and were a year away from retirement and didn't really care what anybody thought about them anymore. But they were sat in the room and you could sense this building frisson. And they were basically waiting to get to specific questions as we went through the paper. And then they just let rip at this poor guy who was representing the exam board, saying, like, I've been doing physics for 25 years and I can't answer this question. And only 3% of students in the country got any mark in it whatsoever. What's the point? And obviously in an exam paper, you need 40% of that paper, you need to be able to get right to get an E, whatever. 50% of it will get you. So ideally the questions are tailored. So the hardest part of the question is the hardest grade. But when the difference between an E and an A is 17%, you have got 20 or 30% of the paper that nobody can answer. It's crazy. They just don't work. But I don't know what's being done to fix that.
Well, David, the other point is that the British education system, just like the French education system, etc., it's globally competitive, and the reason why they uphold GCSEs and A-levels, and the reason why they made them harder is because they are competing and looking at the likes of Singapore and the attainment levels happening in Asia. And they think, well, we need to have kids that can achieve to an equivalent to the international baccalaureate or whatever it might be. So you have this idea that we want to be globally competitive with our education system, even if it is at the detriment of the pupils and the teachers and the parents. And culturally, these countries like at least the UK are very different to Asia. And India, for example, there they don't care. They don't mind rote memorization. It's deeply ingrained in their culture to drill and army drill practice mathematics and subjects, but it's not where we are at. And to compare ourselves to the level of difficulty and technical complexity in their exam boards and what they're achieving, completely disregards the strengths of the country that you're in.
Yeah, I guess you're saying that we're trying to find ways to improve, but what we're doing is we're looking at the 20 or 30-year-old models and trying to compete with them, while we're also trying to change the system. As you say, it makes no sense. Yeah, interesting stuff.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to wrap up because we're at time. Well, just a few minutes over 6 past. But clearly it's a topic that, yeah, there's so much conversation to be had about it. So thank you all for participating and for contributing so much. I've made a note of some of the links and people that have been mentioned, like as references. So I'll send those out with a recording of the talk to you, so you can kind of recap and look up some of the links that were mentioned. If I do miss anything, Atish, I'll send it to you before I send it out, and you can correct any spellings I have wrong. But anyway, Atish, do you have any final words before we end today? Oh, I think he's frozen. Is he frozen? He's frozen.
I'm conscious that I talked for, I didn't realize it was going to be an hour. I planned slides for like 20 odd minutes. So I just hope that people didn't drift off in my laboring on about the things that I've learned. And then just a shameless little plug, I do write every now and then about the things that I'm uncovering from the world of education and learning. So that's the link if anybody wants to subscribe. The website went live yesterday, so you'll be the first 10 subscribers. And, just my little plug there. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Good luck with your PGCE.
Thank you, David. I'm sure we'll connect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, bye.
Cheers, bye.
Bye, everyone. Okay, we did it. We got the internet, we got power, we did a 2-hour thing, it went well. Sylvie's still there. Okay, end.